Hey everybody, back with another update. Finally got the RPG 5.5 liter stroker here. I've also got the Brent ported voodoo heads with the Ferrea dual valve springs for monster cams, titanium retainers, all new valves. Take a look at the intake ports here. Looking mighty nice in there. So a little update. There, everything is here. Got the cams. But I'm also going to do a little tutorial with how to degree a Coyote. I already have most of it set up here. I'll go over the setup. I was mainly checking piston to valve clearance with the having the dome pistons and the big cams and everything like that. So I want to check piston to valve, but in order to get accurate piston to valve, you got to have the cams degreed them properly. So I just degreed one side here to check that, and I use the dial indicator to check the piston to valve clearance. You can see I got some checker springs here on cylinder 6 on both the intake and exhaust. I'm using MMR solid lash adjusters that I've been having to modify in order to get the proper lash between the roller follower and the cam lobe on its base circle. So I'll go ahead and go over the setup here on how to find top dead center, and we'll go from there. All right, so first thing you gotta do is you gotta get cylinder number 1 at top dead center on a Coyote. Bank 1 is the passenger side of the engine. That's considered the right side. Cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8. So find cylinder 1, you're gonna get that at top dead center. Cylinder 1 and cylinder 6, they will both be at top dead center when you figure out number 1. They are just 180 degrees off from each other. Cylinder 1 will be on its compression stroke. Cylinder 6 will be on the exhaust stroke. So when you degree the Coyote, you're gonna start with, well, either one, but you start with cylinder 1, and then you come right over to cylinder 6, and then you're just 180 degrees off. You don't have to change the degree wheel or anything like that. All right, so let's rewind. Before we find top dead center, we're gonna kind of get an idea of where top dead center is after we get our cams timed. So you're gonna time your cams like you would if the car had factory phasers. You're gonna basically, on the Gen 1s, you're just lining up timing marks. Basically refer to the owner's manual, but basically you start on the driver's side here, bank 2. You're gonna get your cams lined up, you get your gears or sprockets installed. Your left side timing mark is gonna be at about the 12 o'clock position, and that's gonna basically have your crank keyway down here somewhere close to like 11 o'clock. And then you line up the marks. You get the mark down here, and then you have the mark, oh, there we go. Get the mark on the sprocket here, kind of hard to see over to get the degree wheel on. You just line them up. I'm using zip ties here to hold the chains tight, so that way you're not fighting any of the little bit of slack in the tensioners here. Boss tensioners work a lot better if you do need to use them, because they have a ratcheting mechanism in there to hold the plunger out. The aluminum bodied tensioners that normally come on the automatic cars, usually Gen 2s, I think even Gen 3s, those suck. There's a lot of play in them. When you're turning the cams and everything back and forth, you're gonna have a lot of slack. It's gonna be a real pain in the ass. So I recommend just eliminating them if you can. Either use some zip ties here to hold the chain guides tight, or you can also use like wood clamps for you know, woodworking or whatever. Your secondary chains here, obviously before you do the primaries, you gotta line up the marks. There's marks on the back side. They're gonna face out on each cam. This is for timing a Gen 1. Marks are gonna face out. The way I remember is the 2 colored links go to the intake cam with 1 sprocket. 2 links to 1 sprocket. And then 1 link to 2 sprockets for the exhaust cam. So you just kind of do it backwards. I'm not sure if it really matters, but that's how it is in the manual, how they want you to do it. Mark's gonna be facing out. Exhaust cam gets the single colored link. Intake cam gets the dual colored links. So once those are lined up, you get your primaries lined up. You can do both sides if you want. I'm just gonna do the one side here, and we can start degreeing. Okay, so our cams are timed, either one side or all sides, doesn't really matter. Next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna verify true top dead center. There's a couple of different methods that you can do. You can use a dial indicator, which can kind of get you close. My preferred method is using the piston stop that comes in the Comp Cams degree kit. You don't really need this kit, but it does kind of help out. You can use your typical dial indicator with a stand, but you know, the magnets don't really work, obviously, because they don't stick to aluminum. But you can make up a little steel plate. That's what I used to do. But we're gonna do this way. We're gonna do the piston stop. Once you get the piston close to top dead center, doesn't have to be perfect, you're gonna throw in that piston stop and tighten it down. Okay, now that we got the piston stop seated, you're gonna use your screwdriver and you're gonna tighten that against the piston. And now, before I do that, what I like to do is I get the piston just in the hole. I like to just go, you know, a tenth of a couple degrees, turn the crankshaft a couple degrees, get the piston in the hole, and then we'll adjust the piston stop. And we're gonna snug that against the crown of the piston. Boom. All right, so our piston stop is set against the piston. Now we're gonna come over here to our degree wheel, and you're gonna set the degree wheel to 0. You mount your piece of wire to a fixed location on the engine, and then you're gonna set your degree wheel to 0 here. Now, this is just for a reference point. Now we're gonna spin the engine over, and then we're gonna feel where the piston stops against the stop. And then we're gonna do some math. So now that we're getting close here, because the piston was just in the hole. All right. So the piston hits the stop at 10 degrees before top dead center. Remember, we started at 0 and now we're at 10. So we're gonna go 0 plus 10 equals 10, divided by 2 is 5. So that means our true top dead center is gonna be 5 degrees before top dead center. So we're gonna turn the degree wheel to 5 here. And we're gonna go backwards. And then you'll see here that we're at 5 degrees after top dead center where the piston stop hits again. So that's how we verify that we have true top dead center, because the piston stop is hitting on the same side of top dead center at the same degree before and after. So we were at 5 degrees before, and now we're at 5 degrees after. That's how we know we have true top dead center. So when I remove the piston stop, when I move the degree wheel to the wire, that's our true top dead center. Now that we know we have true top dead center, We're going to remove the piston stop. And we can begin our degreeing process. Just a couple turns there. And since this was hand tight, I'll take this out. All right, now the next thing to do is to set up our dial indicator. Again, my preferred method for this is using my ComCam's degree kit and using the checking springs and also the MMR solid lash adjusters. These things out of the box were kind of tall. It also depends on what type of a valve job you got and how far the valves are sucked into the seats. That can affect this, but these come with shims, and I have never been able to use the shims because they've been tall on each of the combos that I've used them on to degree cams. So I've actually had to take material off of them in order to get proper lash, which is typically what I like to set it at is around 0.002 clearance between the roller follower and the lobe on its base circle. And I like to use that to degree the cams. So let's go ahead and get the dial indicator set up, and there's a certain way that you need to have it set in order to get accurate measurements. So let's go ahead and do that. Dial indicator is set up. I'm gonna be real with you. Setting up the dial indicator is probably the biggest pain in the ass portion about doing this. Basically, the trick here that you're shooting for is you want the plunger of your dial indicator to be on the same plane as the valve stem. So you want it to be in line so that they move in the same plane as you go through rotating the engine. That's going to give you the most accurate measurements, because any slight variations in the angle of the dial indicator versus the valve stem, it can kind of throw it off a little bit. So as close to the same plane as possible. It is tough. There's not a lot of room in there. You can see here I'm in between the roller follower here to get it on the valve retainer, which is kind of small. That's an OEM Gen 2 retainer that I'm using for this. All right, so now the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna turn the engine over and we're gonna find max lift. And once we find max lift of the cam lobe, or of the actual valve itself, we're gonna then set the dial indicator to 0. Okay, now let's go ahead and find max lift. We're gonna use 90 thou here as our reference point, just to do some math. You look at the cam card, you get an idea of what max lift is supposed to be, so you know when you're getting close. So let's call 90 thou 0. We're gonna start turning the engine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there we go. We found max lift right there. Yes, almost 600 inches of lift on this cam. So let's go ahead and set our indicator to 0. All right, now we're gonna back up 100 thou. So we're gonna go back to 0, roughly. Doesn't need to be perfect here. And then now we're gonna spin our dial indicator until it gets to 50 thou of max lift, 50 thou before max lift. So we're gonna turn this over. All right, we're at 50 thou before max lift. We're gonna come over to our degree wheel and we're gonna note that number. We're gonna use the outer numbers here. We're not using these smaller numbers. But we're gonna use these outer numbers, and we are at 82.5. So note that down, 82.5. Okay, so we noted 82.5 on 50 thou before max lift. So now we're gonna go 50 thou after max lift. So we're gonna go, keep turning over to 0, that's max lift. And then now we're gonna go to the closing side. Back to 50. All right, back to 50 there. Come over here to our degree wheel. We're gonna note where we're at. We're at 151. So 82.5 plus 151, then divide by 2. Let's do some math. All right, 82.5 plus 151. That actually gives us 233.5, I think it was. And then divide by 2 is 116.75. So that means these cams, well, this intake cam currently is at a center line of 116.75. And what you're going to do is, based on whatever your engine builder or cam grinder has you set it at, now is when you start to adjust to dial that in. And then what you do is, with these locks, you loosen up the outers, and then you can grab the cam anywhere, but you don't want to grab it on an actual low, but usually use these flats on the front here to turn the cam. And what you're doing is, when you turn the actual cam, if you turn it, when you're facing it, you turn it to the left on the intake cam, that's going to retard it. That's going to make the number bigger. Okay, so you turn the cam to the left, the number will go from 116 to, say, 120, depending on how much you adjust it from here. That's retarding the intake cam. That's going to cause the events to happen as it stated. You know, it's going to retard the cam events. So that means the intake valve is going to open and close later in the, depending on crankshaft angle. For the exhaust cam, you're going to do the same thing. Once you have your intake cam set, you're going to come over here, you're going to adjust, you're going to get the plunger of your dial indicator set on the retainer for the exhaust valve. Again, make sure you're on the same plane. And then with the exhaust cam, again, when you turn the cam to the left, that actually advances the exhaust cam. So you turn it to the left, that's going to advance it. That is going to make the number bigger, I believe. I think it's going to make the number bigger. So you would go from, say, again, 116 to 120. I might have that reversed. I'll have to double check that. But anyways, that's going to advance the exhaust cam. Turn to the left, turn to the right will retard it. The intake cam turning to the left is retard, turning to the right is advancing. Typically you advance the cams. It's going to help with, especially with the intake cam, it's going to help shift the power curve to the left. So it's going to promote more low or mid-range power, but your peak power is going to happen sooner. When you retard the intake cam, it's going to soften up down low. It's going to move the power curve to the left. So you're not going to have super strong lower mid-range, but it'll extend the power curve to the right to make max power higher in the RPM range. All right, so the other method to adjust the center lines, if you don't have the checking springs and the MMR solid lash adjusters, you can use whatever valve springs you're going to be running with your cams, along with the factory hydraulic lash adjuster. You can use those to degree the cams. It just takes a little bit more time because the factory lash adjuster is hydraulic. You have to let it bleed down while you're in the process of finding max lift and setting the dial indicator. So I'm going to try to simulate here what you're going to have to try to do if you're using the factory hydraulic glass adjusters. So when you come over here and you're turning the engine over and you're getting the valve to open, the lobe will start opening the valve, and you're going to pause, and then you're going to watch the dial indicator. It's going to start moving backwards. That's basically the lash adjuster bleeding, and you're going to watch it go like this. And you want to make sure that it stops completely. It may take a little while. Once it finally stops bleeding, then you continue to find max lift, and then you double check that the dial indicator has stopped moving and that the plunger or that the lash adjuster is completely bled. And then once you have confirmed that, then you can set your dial indicator after finding max lift, and then you do your 50 thou before max lift, 50 thou after max lift, and do your math. Okay, now that we have our cams set to the center line of our choice, our cam grinder's choice, now you also can take this time, if you're using the checker springs, to verify piston to valve clearance with the dial indicator and the valve and the piston with everything assembled. So what we're going to do now is basically the times that the intake valve is closest to the piston is about between 15 degrees before top dead center and then about 15 degrees after. So we're going to take a few measurements of the cam lift before and after top dead center. So what we're going to do is, again, because in the crankshaft angle, when the crankshaft is when it's coming up on the exhaust stroke, right, you have that overlap, and as the piston approaches top dead center of the exhaust stroke, the intake valve is going to start opening before the piston gets there. So the piston's going to be on its way up, and before it gets to top dead center, the intake valve is starting to open. So that's why we're going to check about 15 degrees before top dead center. We're going to come over here as the intake valve is just beginning to open, and the intake valve is now going to start chasing the piston. So then what you're going to do here is you want to push down, preferably on the roller follower to get the valve to open, and then you're going to watch the plunger and see how much movement there is from its current position to when the valve hits the top of the piston. All right, so this is tough trying to do it with one hand. I basically got a screwdriver on top of the valve locks, and now I'm going to push it down, and we're going to count how many times the dial indicator spins to check our clearance. So we use 60 thou as our reference for 0. Let's see, this is tough. One. So it spins around almost 3 times. It's tough to do it with one hand. If I could use 2 hands, you can make it spin slower to get better count. But got plenty of clearance there. So let's move on to now 10 degrees. All right, now we're at 10 degrees before top dead center. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna watch our dial indicator. Got plenty of clearance. All right. Again, you wanna be able to do this slower and get proper counts here, because you're talking, thousandths of an inch, that can, sometimes make or break your clearances here. So we got roughly, I've already done all of this. I'll have to refer back to my notes on my phone here. But I had over 200 thou almost everywhere. The closest spot that I found was just after top dead center, and it was about 170 thousandths, which is more than enough clearance. Usually on like the intake valve, you want to shoot for no closer than like 80 thou. But we're well above that on this combo. We got like 170 thou, so plenty of clearance. All right, so now we can go to 5 degrees before top dead center and do the same thing. Gonna push down on the locks, and we're gonna see how much clearance. And what I'm gonna do is I will put on the screen here in a picture-in-picture of all the measurements that I got when I checked the piston to valve clearance and the different splits on when I took the measurements based on crankshaft angle. And that's pretty much how you do that. That's how you degree the cams. That's how you check piston to valve clearance for the dial indicator. I'm no expert, have a little bit of experience, but always consult with an expert. Sometimes these people are willing to help. RPG has been great with me. MPR has been a lot of help in the past. They're some good guys too. But it's always nice to get hands-on and learn something new. But yeah, that's how I do it. Just repeat the steps for intake and exhaust on one bank and intake and exhaust on the other. It's just tedious, takes a little bit of time, but the results are worth it. And also, that may not be your final settings. You may have to take it all back apart and move the cams. I've had to do that before, where it literally took me weeks to settle on a position, but it was worth it. Picked up like 30 horse once I got it all figured out. So if you have any questions, hit me up. I'll try to make some notes here in the videos. I know I made some typos or made some errors here, but I'll try to get it all corrected. But let me know if you got any questions. Later.